For those of you who are here for the first time, um, thank you for engaging with comics. For those of you who are coming to Delhi from other parts of the globe, welcome to the coolest city in the world. And I don't really know where to begin because I had not really thought of doing comics or graphic novels in my time because there was no term like that. Uh, it's just that my story is quite similar to Shekhar's story. It also starts with an English exam, and but unlike Shekhar, I got good marks, and I negotiated that as a tool to get a first comic in the school book fair. It was 1979. Amar Chitrakatha had just come out, the form you know, known for mythologies and hero comics. And that used to be 1 rupee 75 paisa, and the National Book Trust books used to be 1 rupee 50 paisa. And during our time, reading comics was a banned activity. It was a forbidden activity because it would take away our reading habits for our parents. And now we come to cool conventions like these. So we have actually moved. So I negotiated that exam sheet as a tool from my mother to buy me a first comic, and like a good Bengali mother, the first comic that I got was Rabindranath Tagore. And my journey from comics started and probably ended there. We would be caught if we would our comics would be taken away in school if we were caught reading under the table, kind of a thing. So the journey eventually faded away, and I did not really have any idea that I'll be doing comics one day or graphic novels because I went to an art school, and as it happens that after you finish art school, the last thing you want to do is art. So I went to a film school, and 2 years later, the last thing I wanted to do ever on earth was to hold a camera. So I thought over time, and I thought comics is a good medium to get both and justify my graduation and my post-graduation, and I started doing comics. And in fact, the first comic I really wanted to do was actually my life in an art school, because no one knows where the Delhi Art School is. And I thought that will be the coolest thing because, no one knows who we are. And it was also, I think, also the time when, Annie Gives It to Those Ones, which was Arundhati Roy's film on SPA, had come out. And I thought I'll make one like that and do something about my life in college. But by the time I finished college, Photoshop arrived. And everything that I had learned was redundant. So I said, chodo. And that was my first comic. That never happened. Then I wanted to do one on partition. Every Bengali in Delhi has to do a book on partition. So do I. So, but I just over the time thought about it and I kept thinking about it, and nothing really happened because I just thought I didn't really know where to fix my voice in the larger scheme of things. And then I was assisting a friend, and he was doing a film on the emergency, and I thought, oh, wow, I mean, there's a great visual possibility here. And I was only 3 when the emergency happened. Maybe this is a great place to begin. And as usual, it stayed in my head, and then nothing happened. So I'm going to take you through all that happened in between when something happened and nothing happened. This is something that has stayed with me over the time, is Chris Ware's point where he says that we've stopped reading pictures and we have forgotten how to engage with visuals. I write the story with pictures. I don't illustrate the story with pictures. I think this is a dilemma that all practitioners come across: the battle between the visual and the written word, and there is a whole thing of he uses so much text versus he uses so less text, and she uses texts economically or ergonomically and all of that. I think it's to each his own, his or her own. So I don't really debate whether there's a lot of merit in using no text and or using a lot of text, but I definitely feel as a private practitioner, I feel using no text comic and actually taking a story from beginning to end is the ultimate form of a meditative practice one can go through. I mean, Thomas Ott does that all the time. So I mean, it's not something I aspire for, it's something I'm in awe of. For me, I use a lot of text. So this is one of my first comics. As I said, this is a journey between having no comic and then a published book. So this is one of my first comics. It's small little interaction, informal interaction with a illegal Pakistani immigrant in a metro train in Paris. And the way I drew it, it was also keeping a sketchbook format in mind, and keeping a real urgency to tell the story out first before the journey finishes and get it out of my sketchbook, kind of a thing. So yeah, so this was about a story with an interaction with a Pakistani immigrant who had just moved into Paris 3 days back, had no knowledge of English or French, but was super confident to take the city by the horn, kind of a thing. And this interaction is about his migration journey and his take on migration, the concept of migration. And he asked me, "What do you do?" So I said, "I mean, I just thought it's going to be a long journey to explain graphic novels, residency, na 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 na." So I just said, "I'm here on a computer job. I'm working for TCS or something." And then he said, "Oh, you're so well educated, and also, what are you planning to do?" I said, "Our project gets over in the next 2 months, and I go back." And he stopped in his tracks and he said, "Are you mad? You're going back? I'm just here 3 days back, and I know how to deal with this." And he knew the entire immigration policy in France, in Europe at that point of time, without any internet and all. So for me, that was a fascinating story. And so yeah, this is his journey, how he came via Iran, via Moscow, and all of that. And I thought this needs to be documented, and I put this as into comic. These are some sketchbook notes from Zurich. Again, some interactions and all. These are all basically ballpoint jottings in my sketchbook, which I thought had that sense of urgency for me to put it in and document it. So I did that. There's some of our finished drawings or unfinished drawings, bit of a collage kind of a thing that I used. Again, interacting and talking and expressing whatever I see right there and then kind of a thing. This is a take on Migros. For those of you from Edition Moderne here and Pro Helvetia would know that every Swiss city has 3 institutions. One is a church, one is a lake, and one is a Migros. So everything that you find, from an underwear to a rocket, you find in a Migros. So the entire Swiss consumption is that of Migros. So I just thought, how do we deal with this whole thing of Migros and as a Swiss citizen? So I collected a lot of bills and put them together in this particular drawing. And this is actually a replication of a video that I saw in one of the museums there. It's an interview with an illegal immigrant who's telling you how to survive in Geneva or Zurich by staying anonymous. And they have not shown her face, and she just tells you how to go about it. So I thought it was a very powerful documentary. So I just drew that as I was watching it, and I put together in a storyboard kind of a thing. So it's a reverse. It's a film that got made into a storyboard. Oops. Yeah. So yeah. So for me, it's not the way what you say stirs people, is the way you say it. So for me, style is very important. But to tell you the truth, I don't have one. So when people say, "Oh, I saw this work of yours and I knew this was your style," and I'm really in the dark and I'm wondering, okay, right. That's cool. Because I love shopping. I love shopping for ideas. I love shopping for styles. And I think for me, the story dictates the style, which was the name of this presentation. Because for me, I think it's the style that comes after I know the narrative well in my head. So this is a story that I did for Edition Moderne and Andy's publishing house, and then HarperCollins, about Indian traveling to Zurich. And here I've used a lot of family memoirs, family stuff of a family member who had actually traveled and had some stuff stuffed in the suitcases. So for me, it was an interesting time to mix my sketchbooks, the archival photographs, and the jottings into a narrative. So there are parts which is like a mainstream comic. There are parts which are like completely, a para from the textbook prose kind of a thing. And I used, again, all the influences that I have known, and I've acknowledged that, whether it's the Amar Chitrakatha, whether it's the picture charts we grew up in, and all of that. So yeah, for me, the idea is to keep acknowledging what I've seen and what I've known all the while, and keep telling stories in my own way. This is actually a tribute to the picture charts. We grew up in the 70s, and everything had to be done through the picture charts. So this is a story about how I got my first tinkle. There's nothing but spectacular about this story. But the backstory is that when Tinkle asked me for the 600th edition, if you can give us a story, and I said I can tell you how I got my story. They said that's a great idea, but the thing is we can't pay you. So I said okay, but they said, but we can send you all the Amar Chitra Kathas that have been published so far. So I said, okay. So I'm sharing you a point of envy rather than a story. So and this was a tribute to Anant Pai, who was quite a figure of our childhood, because he's the publisher of Amar Chitra Katha, and fondly known as Uncle Pai. He was Anant Pai till Amar Chitra Katha happened, and he became Uncle Pai only after Tinkle happened. So when he passed away, I did this comic on our growing up with Amar Chitra Katha, and I used the visuals from Amar Chitra Katha, and how Amar Chitra Katha became a part of our narrative, and is still a part of our narrative. So even now when friends meet after 3 beers, we get into this pop quiz, अच्छा बता रावण की बीवी का नाम क्या था? And that's completely do with Amar Chitra Katha. So, so this whole thing of pop quiz, the mythology that gets integrated into our system, actually for us started with comics. And here we, on the left bottom you can see Rabindranath Tagore, because he was my first comic. You can't deny the influence of the man if you're growing up in a Bengali household. This was a comic I did in the metro, on the metro in Delhi, and a heartbreak that happens somewhere, and meeting an astrologer. This is a very old work. But this is the reason I show it to you is probably where I started realizing that I want to do watercolors as a medium. I want to explore it in a longer form. And then came Delhi Calm, my first book published by HarperCollins. This book stayed in my head for 8 years, and then I finished it in 2 years. And for me, the whole idea was to research but explore Delhi the way I knew it, the way I saw it, and make a political story out of the times that we lived in or we remember. So there was a lot of oral histories, a lot of memoirs that went into the story, and my own love for a nostalgic watercolor, all put together. Press clippings, all of that. So again, so as I said, I mean, I never shy away from acknowledging influences. As you can see, a Mother India, you can see a still from Do Bigha Zameen, and on your right, the masked faces is actually, if you think about it, is the inspired from the cover of the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band vinyl. So I put in as much, and I show off that I know this, I know Nargis, so that kind of thing. This is again a piece from Delhi Calm, an ad that came out a day after the emergency was declared in the obituary section, because press was censored. The editor of Reader's Digest in those days actually put an ad in the obituary section of the Times of India saying that Deocracy, Dem, beloved husband of T. Ruth, loving father of liberty, brother of faith, hope and justice, expired on 26 January 1975, which was a great way of subverting, and I used that in the narrative. Again, some more pages based on forced sterilizations and press censorship, and all of that happened. This image is actually inspired from calendar art, so this whole thing of the Mata, or the Holy Mother, the Godmother, being the supreme and everything working around it, was actually happening in the calendars on our walls, and also happening in the political system. So I just thought I'll put them together. So a few more frames, and this is probably where the book ends. This is a story, a real story of a friend of mine whose mobile got lost, and this is the story of how he went legally to get it illegally, kind of a thing, and how he worked the system, the police and the intelligence, and worked around it. And he told me, don't tell anyone. And So I just drew a comic and I had as many dark shades so that he's not recognizable, and I got it published also. So yeah, so yeah. This is a story from my first visit to Lahore, a city I love, because Delhi is a city I think is the coolest one, and then Lahore comes second, and we both breathe the same air, whatever we're breathing these days. And I think for me, what is important is that it's a mix between a collage and a sketchbook all put together, and my own takeoff from there, and my own this whole Indian's burden, or Delhiite has this burden of going to Lahore. We have to go to Lahore in our times. Like if you're a Hindu, you have to go and have a bath in the Ganges. Yeah, if you're a Delhiite, you have to go to Lahore. It's something, a tick you have to do before the bucket in your bucket list. So for me, the burden of memory was really something. So yeah, I put this together. This is a story I did on the silent era of Indian films. I before I got into film school, I was a big enthusiast of film history. I forgot all about it after I went to film school. So this is actually a time from the silent era when when the whole concept of the blonde was the face of the feminine face of Indian cinema, because it was about fearless adventure, you know, being out there kind of a thing. It's only when the talkies happened, people didn't want the blondes to sing a Tukaram or a Surdas, so they wanted the girl next door. And the whole concept of the female iconography of Indian cinema changed. And so this is a small little comic I did about the transition for on the 100 years doing for the 100 years of cinema issue, one of them. And yeah, and I kept a palette which is like does not is not sepia, but closer to the, I mean, when we were watching an old cinema on in Doordarshan, was a black and white experience, but after color TV came in, it was like three registrations going off, and three little forms would float, and Raja Harishchandra would appear, or something would happen. So for me, that was important to get that mixed up tonality, which we saw on our television sets. This is something I have been debating with, not a particularly fan of, is using folk styles in narratives of mine. I'm not very particular fan of that. I mean, in the sense, G.P. Deshpande, the famous playwright, once said that there's something very seductive about using folk art, and it just draws you in, and doesn't leave the space for the narrative too much. Especially if you're doing a contemporary narrative or something. I mean, you can do what do you say? Give me any of the mythological stories. Like the Patachitras of Bengal, the Lokhindor Behula, or those kind of stories. It goes very well, but when I see a Martin Luther King, when I see a Nelson Mandela happening in Patachitras, I feel this sense of disconnect. I mean, I had written one review about it, reviewing one of the books, and the editor had very aptly named it as the creative mistakes of globalization. You have a writer in one part of the world, you have an illustrator in another part of the world. The illustrator has no clue who Martin Luther King is, but he's illustrating. He's merely illustrating it in his own style. And then you have a graphic designer in another part of the world who's bringing it all together. I just feel there's an inorganic text happening somewhere. And this is something I've debated. I mean, you can completely disagree with it, but this is something I have debated with myself, and so I just thought of myself being in that space and doing something using that form to tell a contemporary story. So this is a story again set in Delhi in the contemporary times, all of that, and I have used again influences from Patachitra iconography to Kajrare to all of that, and in various forms and styles. This is again something that I've just scribbled over the time, and I just put some colors together, an incomplete work. Again, using form of text, a long form, and I don't know if that's working or not. So these are dabblings actually. These are rantings. This is an interview, not an interview, but an interaction on the street, and I used photocomic here as a medium because I thought there was something very urgent about that particular interaction about an Irani restaurant in Lajpat Nagar, and this whole thing was shot on a mobile phone, and I converted that into a narrative. So I just thought if I can just put that and see how does it work in a narrative. So I just put those images together and created a narrative around it. Execution becomes content in a work of genius. I'm not one, but I'm pretending to be one. So broadly, that's it. Do I have time or? Okay, so I'm going to take 5. I'm going to just show you a little video about the last work that I put together, which was basically an anthology of comics on partition. Since this was the first book I wanted to do and never did, and when the publisher came and said, why don't you think about this book? And I said, yeah, that will be great. And we started thinking, and we put together 48 illustrators and writers from Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. And we did this whole thing of working on partition. And for me, what was important is not re-talking about partition the way it's happened or way we have mugged it up in our textbooks, but the way we have negotiated, the third generation has worked around it. And for me, it was interesting to see the perspectives of Pakistan and Bangladesh. What is Batwara for us is Azadi for them. So to see how does it work. Some of the contributors are here today, and so yeah, it's something that we all had great time working on. So I'm just going to show you a little glimpse of the book itself. Thank you. That's it. And once again, organizers, thank you.